Hello, it's Pastor Dietrichs. I'm reporting to you from the youth room of Calvary Lutheran Church, and we are talking about, and I am reading from, this book called The Spirituality of the Cross, the Way of the First Evangelicals in this Lent, this very weird and strange Lent, the time before Easter, having begun a global pandemic and time of quarantine around St. Patrick's Day this year. Here we are marching through Lent, though, and I really want everybody to try and learn about their faith through this book. Now, some aspects of it are, he does use a rather large vocabulary for some people, but trust me, this is not too hard, too complex. I really believe that the most profound things in life can be simply explained, and so if you allow me, I will read from the preface to his new edition from 2010. The words of Dr. Jean Edward Veith. By the way, Dr. Veith is not a pastor. He is a Lutheran layman from Wisconsin, and so this is what he shares. This book explains a Christian tradition that is rich, historic, and particularly relevant today. Yet hardly anyone outside of Lutheran circles, and sometimes not even within them, is aware of it. But in a time when Christianity has become confused with moralism, politics, and what Martin Luther called the spirituality of glory, the spirituality of the cross becomes a liberating, paradigm-shifting alternative. Many people, from both varied religious backgrounds and no background at all, have found it so. I am constantly amazed as I hear from or about people whose lives were changed by this little book. I find that strangely humbling and an example of vocation, something in which God works through ordinary human beings. I was not trying to change anyone's life when I undertook the writing of this little book. But if it helps people understand who Jesus is, what he accomplished for us, and how he is still present in the world, I have to be glad. If this book helps people know the freedom that comes from Jesus, if it helps people know that Jesus bears their sufferings with them, I can only be thankful. I wrote the first edition of this book at the end of the last century. Since then I have traveled even further along this way of the first evangelicals, and have a few more things I'd like to say about it, hence the new edition. I have studied some of these in greater depth, and this new edition reflects that. I've also been involved with more churches that are part of the Lutheran tradition. Some of the characteristics that I discussed in the first edition held true for the churches I knew then, but not necessarily all of them that I know now. What I said about pastors and congregations, I now know do not describe the practices in all Lutheran churches, which for all of their unity in following the spirituality of the cross, nevertheless are free to exhibit quite a lot of diversity in practice. There were other points that I explained unclearly, judging from questions that have been asked me, and so I am taking another stab at them. I've also included more resources that I have found invaluable in living a life under the cross, resources that are an intrinsic part of this tradition. They include Luther's little book of instruction called the Catechism, the Book of Concord or Agreement, the Rite of Confession and Absolution, and the writings of someone I strangely said little about in the first edition, that theologian of the radical gospel and of life under the cross, Martin Luther. Some readers may confuse this Martin for Martin Luther King Jr., but Martin Luther King Jr. was named after this Martin Luther, who lived in the 16th century back in Germany. Back to Dr. Veith. He says, so this new edition should be more complete, more accurate, and I hope even more helpful. Since the first edition was written, I believe that this so-called Lutheran approach to Christianity is now more relevant than ever to our postmodern times. The theologies of glory fail, provoking scorn against Christianity rather than winning converts. Christianity has become confused with politics, with power, and/or with culture. The only Christianity many people know is oppressive and life-denying, a network of rules and moralisms that no one can fulfill. Religions of mere law soon degenerate into hypocrisy, having to do not so much with righteousness, as the Bible says it should, as with self-righteousness. Ironically, self-righteousness, or being holier than thou, tends to bear fruit in a very unrighteous way, leading to harshness, cruelty, and a lack of love. In another irony, such law-heavy versions of Christianity, far from attracting anyone to the Christian faith, instead provoke rebellion against it. To many people, Christianity is dishonest, fake, with nothing to say to the real human condition and to the joys and sufferings of everyday life. But as Luther himself said, in comparing his understanding of Christianity to others that were current even in his day, we have a different spirit than they. People today have become cynical, and understandably so. Postmodernist thinkers go so far as to say that all religions, ideologies, and cultural institutions are nothing more than constructions that people design to impose power over other people. These meta-narratives, as they're called, are really all about power, they say. But in response, an interesting defense for Christianity has arisen. There is one meta-narrative that is not about power at all. It is about the abnegation of power, centering on a powerful God who empties himself to become a poverty-stricken, homeless baby in a manger or feeding trough for animals, and who is killed by torture as a criminal on a Roman cross. And yet, strangely, this death redeems us, as we too give up our power and accept his free gift. This one meta-narrative is not about power, and so is not a human construction. The other meta-narratives are constructions by corrupt human beings, asserting a selfish will to power. But this one is so different. The problem is, many articulations of Christianity are about power, of institutions, of politics, of our own power to solve our problems, which is why so many people today see them as missing the point. But the kind of spirituality that can bear up to the postmodernist critique and speak most profoundly to the contemporary spiritual condition is precisely the spirituality of the cross.